Welcome back to Code Ryan. Today I have on Ryan Hoffnan joining me to discuss signals and how they can be useful when developing your own apps here. But before I kind of get into that and a really awesome article that Ryan wrote called Signals, What's Going On Behind the Scenes, I'm first going to ask Ryan here, if you were riding in an Uber or a Lyft and they kind of turned around and asked you, hey, what do you do? How would you kind of respond to that?
So I would say, so nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Ryan. I would say that I'm a senior front-end developer with some back-end work. I love doing very cool stuff and learning about the next new buzzword.
Awesome. So staying up with the latest trends and new technologies and stuff like that.
It's hard to track of, but yeah, you have to do it.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I think that is a very good lead into a new library or technology that it seems like is kind of pretty cool. So what I'm alluding to here is signals. And I think a good place for us to start here, Ryan, is just like, what are signals?
So Signals is nothing new. Signals is an abstraction to an idea that already has been years to come and had been used already for so much time in the past. And it's just a brand new way to re-render your code in an event-driven manner. And we can expand that obviously later. It's changing how components and code is re-rendered on the page in basic terms.
Gotcha. And when saying in kind of an event-driven matter, what does that kind of mean?
So if we go back to the complex frameworks we used to use today, we have the lifecycle, we have hooks, and whatever kind of mechanism these frameworks use, they're passive. It means we're waiting for a timer or checking to happen, and then we re-render the code based on those. So if we 1 second take aside, for example, the use effect of React. So each time the component re-renders, it checks the dependencies of use effect, see if they changed, and if not, it returns a cache response, and if yes, it re-renders the function inside the use effect. So that's passive, right? We recheck and re-render. With signals, event-driven, you say, hey, here's the new data, and here you have to update it because I told you there's new data to put here. So if you go back to basic JavaScript with callbacks, that's what we do, right? We say on click, you do this, and then in response, you do that. And that's the event driven we kind of know and love from the basic callback functions of the past of JavaScript. So event driven actually means creating a flow instead of passive. So we create a funnel of events triggered by one another. And that's the event-driven, pattern we talk about a lot at Signals.
Gotcha. So in something like the React use effect hook, it kind of re-renders and then it checks its dependencies to see if it then needs to kind of make additional updates from there. But with more of an event-driven paradigm, that event occurs, and then right as that event occurs, it automatically updates as it's a little bit more of that kind of proactive approach and just re-renders on that event rather than just kind of checking a dependency array or something like that. Does that sound about right?
Exactly. That's exactly that. I can even give a more maybe better example. In the past, to want to change the DOM, we would have to go into a query selector and change the HTML, by action. There's an event which made me change this thing. And the modern frameworks, it's not by action, it's kind of by decision made by the change detection mechanism. Those are the two biggest differences that comes with this event driven and what we know today about modern frameworks.
Gotcha. Perfect. That absolutely makes sense. And when kind of looking at this a little bit further, we kind of already discussed it, but how does like this signals package work? And to be clear, is this signals, it's a library, correct, that handles more of an event-driven way is it to manage state, or what is kind of the purpose of this signals package?
So Signal is a package created by the pre-React team. So pre-React is a fork of React. We kind of removed all the things we don't think are necessary to make it slimmer, faster, and everything. So the slogan of Signals is, you can just kind of like read it from it. is a reactive primitives for managing application state. Now, that's a lot of buzzwords. For yeah, it's essentially it's a state management solution, uh, but based on primitives. And what that means is if we know and kind of know from Redux or NGRX or whatever, we kind of throw a lot of responses as objects into the store and kind of, oh, that will deal with it, everything. So here it's based on primitives. That means the most basic variables, the string, number, whatever, like basic. So it that's a it actually it can work with more complex objects, but it's not for it. But it's supposed to be an application state as as state was intended to be in old past JavaScript.
Gotcha.
Because today's stores are kind of like a database at this point, right? We throw everything inside. Let's say we have a table, so we throw all the table data inside of it, and then we filter within that store. Essentially it's a database in the client, which is not what store was supposed to do. Store was supposed to be, oh, we want to have the color black and not white, light and dark. Sorry, cool. Then that's the state I'm having. That was a state in the past, in the basic form.
Perfect. That absolutely makes sense. And then when kind of diving in deeper to how they work, it might be, I would definitely recommend if someone's just listening to this or watching this to go check out your article because it's a lot easier to kind of see how this works when you have an example of kind of using this API and stuff like that. But maybe just like an overview, how does this kind of signals package work or kind of how would you use it?
So the way it works is once you create a signal, you essentially create a registry, which every time you tap into the value, you add this area to the registry of places which are that needs to be notified on changes. So when you put in the paper is actually very written when you put the dot value, you essentially use the getter function, which registers that area. It can be an HTML, it can be a compute function as well. It can have different stuff, and then it just waits idly just for something to happen. And when we set a new value on that value and that signal, it triggers and notifies all that registry saying, hey, here's the new value. Update yourself, obviously, synchronously within those areas. And that means that I'm creating an event-driven render. So I change a value, and then that one place is notified, saying, oh, look, there's a new value here, re-render this area. So again, the benefit here is that it renders only what is actually changed, that small area and not the entire component or even HTML elements. There is some downfalls for it, by the way, because you're missing a lot of like the smart stuff React does. For example, lifecycle events within those subcomponents. If you want to have like an effect, you like by that value, which it's fixable, but I mean it's kind of like anti-pattern to what these frameworks are doing. So I would use signals if I wanted to create a flow, right? Because signals are great for creating flows of events. So if I have an example written down here, I want to do an authentication process, right? So I want to see, is the user logged in? No, he logs in. I update it to true. And then I have a compute, which is just waiting for compute is a different kind of signal, which is based on other signals. And say, oh, this value changed. Okay, please check if it's verified. I'm not checking every single time if it's verified. Only when I know that value is true of the logged in, I can check if it's verified. And remove all these if and else statements that are kind of like, helping yourself not run code that's not relevant. So this kind of flow pattern, and then obviously it's verified, then go to the dashboard page. This kind of flow of data, which is essentially based on three different functions, are reusable because they're framework agnostic, they're basic JavaScript, and B, they are so readable and simple and easy to kind of modify and edit. Obviously, we all have used some sort of login authentication process in our web apps. It's usually a mess. And you have all this. Oh, if not logged in, then throw him back. Yeah. But I think it's more important about what it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a database for any response you have from your server. It's supposed to create very small and create very small memories of what your app is having right now. If it's the table, if it's if you're sorted by name, then upward, like decrease or ascending or descending, that's something I would keep in that state. And those kind of things, because these are things that don't change every single second and need user interaction to change it. And those are stuff I would keep in the signals. Um, I think a side mark here is kind of needed. This is very, very new. I think a lot of stuff I might say now may be completely different in a month time. There are so many PRs open, so many discussions about, oh, we can do this better and that better. And I even tried to add a feature myself because I had an issue I wanted to fix with it. It's still very, very growing. I think Signals is here to change how frameworks render, and that's amazing. That's finally a solution that's came.
Yeah. And I think that's really good context as well. And you mentioned in your article as well. It's like, hey, this is a new kind of relatively untested technology that it probably still has like some bugs to work out and some things to figure out. But overall, the idea of kind of the purpose behind the package and how it works and use cases that it has, it would definitely be cool to have it like fully fledged out and to be able to use it in our applications and everything. So I think that's really good context to give there.
Right now, for example, the Angular team has a PR open about integrating signals within the Angular process, right? So this is a very React podcast, but again, I'm expecting people to have some idea. Um, I have a different article about say of trying to like take the limits of signals and like in Angular is very very complex, right? Because the way it works is completely different and than React. And within again Angular, there's so many ticks and issues that didn't work as expected, and it's no one's to blame here, but everyone's to blame, right? Because Signal works in a very JavaScript all time fashion. Angular is working on more class OOP area. How does that work logically and ideally with the process? Um, Angular works extremely coupled with RxJS, which is also an event-driven library. How does that work together? Does it work together? Even in React, we have all these kind of use hooks. Does it replace every hook? What kind of hooks does it replace? And all these questions aren't even battle tested to the point of a small POC at home. It's not even like, okay, GraphQL wasn't battle tested and then Netflix took it because it's not even like in a POC level yet. And the code is really cool because it takes you to like a very, very like classic JavaScript solution. But you can see the gaping holes of like this is not production ready. This is not there yet. It still has a lot of like the tweaks to do. Um, for example, error handling is something that's very undealt with. For example, in the library, maybe doesn't need to. Good discussion, maybe. Um, but again, the frameworks right now are trying to integrate it within themselves because they see the importance of it. And I'm sorry if Mishka from Angular sees the importance of it. He's smarter than I am by by a lot. I'll
Yeah.
take his word for it. And if
Hmm.
the so again, so I'm not trying to like preach here. It's already done for me on by the biggest people in the industry. Um, but the thing, the problem here is we're kind of using libraries as black boxes, and I tried to deep dive and see how this like apparently magic works, and it's really cool to deep dive into because it's not as complex as you might think about if you understand how JavaScript works, and that was really fun to do. And it's kind of like it's essentially three files. The entire library is three files: one for core, one for React, one for pre-React. It's nothing whatsoever inside. I think it's like 3,000 lines of code, not even that much. Very easy to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's cool as well. I know when I like first started programming, it's like whenever I used a library, I just figured that it was like this like complex code that was hundreds of files and just all this complexity like buried within this black box. But more and more, when kind of diving into the source code of some of these packages and stuff like that, you kind of end up seeing that, okay, this is actually like relatively simple. And if I really wanted to like write this out myself, I probably could figure out a way to do it. So I think that's important understanding, as well as like these packages, they aren't just like these black boxes that are ununderstandable and that they just can't be approached. Like you can dive into these packages that you use and look into the source code, and you can logically kind of step through how they're doing some things. And that can be really useful when trying to debug certain things or trying to figure out like, why is it working like this when I expected it to work like this, and just gaining a better understanding of kind of these packages.
So the team at Pre-React did an amazing work. First of all, I think commenting about their code and explaining, because it is like not complicated, it's kind of like hard to grasp why. But also like the way the code is written, like like logically, I guess how the code is written makes sense. Like you read it top to bottom. There's no reason to go back up again. Like it's flowed correctly, and you understand how it works just by reading it like as if it was a book. And that, no to any open source contributor. Wow, yes, we all need that. It's so important, and no need for a million files and a million abstractions.
Yeah.
Read it like a book. That was amazing to me. I was like, wow. I really hope every single library writes this way in the
Hmm.
future.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've also read into some libraries that definitely don't definitely don't take that approach of reading like a book, and it's a little bit more
Yep.
tricky. But awesome to hear that they took the time to make sure that things were readable throughout their code and stuff.
So I do want to pop up. It's like I have a different article as well on the matter. It's not like trying to publish myself, but I mean it's kind of deep dives into more about what can be like the limitations of signals today. And I think it's a very fun experiment to kind of like break it and see how you fix it, kind of to tweak it into to working. And then you really understand how it really works behind the scenes and how the frameworks themselves kind of catch it or don't catch it in response.
And with this, we kind of touched on it already, but we kind of, so just to overview, Signals is a library made by the pre-React team that can be a good way to manage some different workflows, that to kind of create a flow of your state and to kind of manage some different state within your application in an event driven way. And with that, do you see Signals as a replacement to certain state management systems like the use state hook, or like things like Redux, or uh, even Recoil, if you've kind of looked into that package at all? Or do you kind of see this as more of like an add on for these specific use cases of when you have like a login workflow or something like that?
So that's a great question, 'cause I think that's a question everyone kind of trying to think if it's possible or not possible. At this current state, the answer is an add-on. Now the question is if it's right, if is it the correct thing to add another framework or another library on top of our code. So Signals is not React, it's JavaScript. It can be put in different files outside of components, outside of anything. And that's maybe the best part of it, maybe the worst part of it. Because as before, today's state management systems, if it's Redux, NGRX, Fuchs, whatever you want to call it, are databases essentially today, right? They're reactive databases. So right now, I can't decouple this behavior of having the storage a DB and how the app reacts to it. So right now I can't decouple that. Even Recoil, even take React Query, which has like its own internal store and own internal state. I still can't see it possible to decouple these two and create oh, you can use this and that. The question about hooks though is more interesting in my opinion, because signals can avoid prop drilling, right? You can just completely avoid it. You don't need it. Um, but it's very hard to kind of pinpoint where you actually need this. So I said, for example, on the table, so I want to have like if it's sorted, if it's filtered or whatever, and what do you store where. So if I would use signals on purpose, I would use that data of the table, for example, on the signals. But it's so easily used in hooks. It'd be very hard to tell someone, "Oh, go out of your way to use it in signals instead of hooks." They use state hook for the point being, because obviously, again, you have the use state, then you have the use memo or use callback to kind of react the entire flow. It'll be very hard to decouple it mentally. Code wise, ability wise, oh, please move from use memo and use effect and use state to use signal. That would be so much better and smarter. But I think it will take time. And so those are kind of my answer. You can't separate from the DB store. You can separate. You can exchange it with use hooks with the use hooks, but you have to be smart about it because use memo and compute it are the same thing. But use callback is still going to be used, or use ref is still going to be important. For example, in React, you can't change it with that, so it changes only part of the hooks, and then very hard to maintain which hooks you keep, which hooks you don't keep. It's still not a complete solution for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another consideration is that when people are like learning React today, they're probably just learning the hooks. They're probably not learning signals or other event driven paradigms. So there's a good likelihood that on your team, they might not even know what signals are. And they're so used to the React thought process of using the different hooks, like use effect and different things like that, to where the juice might be worth the squeeze, so to speak, when switching to something like signals. Now, of course, as this gets more fully fledged out and more tested, and even if you mentioned that Angular was kind of working towards implementing something like this within their own kind of library and everything, like if React came out with some sort of more event driven paradigm to manage state and stuff, then this would be like a similar approach to that, to where it's definitely something to stay on top of.
Today, I won't expect any junior or any self-taught or even bootcamp developer say, "Oh yeah, of course I work with signals." No way, not gonna happen. Gonna use whatever's in the basic tutorial. And I think it's like using any other library. Example, when I came to the last company I worked on, I never worked with I don't know, Apollo or with Material UI for React, right? So if I have the basic understanding how API works, then it'll take me 2 or 3 days and I'm on top of it. I wouldn't ask anyone to go out of the way to learn signals before getting a new job. It's not a it's a luxury to know. It's not something I would say it's core. I wouldn't judge or even ask a question in an interview about it. But the more and more it's integrated, as you said, within the library's core, then yes, it will obviously be requested. If we say how React moved to use hooks, that one day it's like, oh guys, forget class components, don't need them anymore. Just hooks, just functional components, entire complete redesign of the API. Then again, very hard, but that will do it. I don't see it happening again anytime soon. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe.
Absolutely. Well, I think that gives a good overview of what signals are, how they work, where you might use them. If you could just maybe give a few practical takeaways on signals, maybe where you would potentially use them, or kind of the purpose of them, what would those kind of few just kind of round up takeaways be?
So I would use signals for something that is global and not very changeable for this state, right? So example, I said, what's the app theme that I'm using? So I want to use, dark or light theme, put it there. If I have, for example, the login state or the user information, and I want to have it's a one time, right? I'm not going to change it every single time, but I do have a flow. For example, yes, the user state, the I don't know, application settings, um, even local storage management. I guess I would even insert there, just because it's basic JavaScript and have some abstraction of it. Um, so those are the examples I would put for how I would use signals today. Even as feature flags, right? So obviously feature flags are used, for example, launch darkly or whatever. So you usually run your app and then you check what feature flags the user has on. And I don't want to go over them every single iteration. I check for a feature flag. I want to have signals for it. So once I update a signal, the feature flag is on, then they have a reaction to it, and hey, the user has this new feature up and running for him. So I think that those are kind of like 2, 3 things I would use today with signals, especially with the computed signal, what we need to talk about, but it's also there. Um, Completely, that's a justified reason to use signals. I can obviously still use it with Redux or whatever I want to use today, but I think it's very smart to start like decoupling those kind of things out to somewhere else.
Perfect. Well, I think that gives some good takeaways of when you might use them. And for those listening, just keep in mind this is not like a prerequisite that you need to learn to, use React or to get a job in front end development. It's probably just more so something that is good to know about and to stay up to date with kind of this new technology. And it has some work to go on being fully tested out and fledged out. But it is something to just kind of like keep in the back of your mind that this is a way to kind of manage these use cases that you just mentioned and can be potentially useful for solving different problems in your application in the future. Thank you so much for coming on today, Ryan. If people want to stay up to date with kind of what you're doing online, the articles you're posting, stuff like that, where would be a good spot for them to follow you, or where can they find kind of the stuff that you're putting out?
So first of all, always Medium, and also have my own blog, which is updated automatically from Medium. It's hoffmanryan.com, or LinkedIn, or even just send me a Facebook, GitHub, whatever email. Just contact me. I'll be happy to talk about it. Have discussion about it. I love it, and yeah, I'm really excited for it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.